I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and today I'm going to do a dyeing project that I've been wanting to do for a long time, but I just haven't done for whatever reason. And today we're going to dye Knit Picks Swish fingering weight yarn for the first time. Swish fingering is the fingering weight version of a yarn base I dye all the time, Swish DK, which is 100% superwash merino wool. And I'm going to talk about why I haven't dyed this very much yet in a moment, but first I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to today's lab partner, Madison. Madison, thank you so much for being my lab partner for today's episode of Dyepot Weekly. So the newer skein of Swish fingering feels just like Swish DK. It has that same softness and lofty feel to it. The label of the yarn that I have, and this newer one is still probably a few years old, does say it's 100% superwash wool, but the website listing does list it as 100% superwash merino wool. And so if I had received this newer skein, I would have dyed a ton of it already. But the very first skein I received of it has a noticeable texture difference, which isn't bad. It just didn't feel like what I had come to expect from the Swish line. And the label on that yarn also said 100% wool, or superwash wool, not superwash merino. So I wondered if at the time the yarn wasn't merino, if it was a different wool. And the thing about it is that my disappointment was if this was called something else, if it was called superwash wool fingering, I would have felt it and loved it. But because I was expecting what I was used to from the Swish line, I felt disappointed, and so I haven't dyed it yet. And so today I want to dye the newer one that feels like I expect side by side with the older one to see if I can still notice a difference once the yarn has been dyed. And because I can say now the differences are subtle, but I can pick them up in either hand and tell, okay, this is the old one versus the new one. And so again, the old one is by no means bad, I just had slightly different expectations for it. I hope that that makes sense. It's possible that it was always superwash merino and that the texture difference comes from something not being rinsed off or washed off after the milling process. So it's possible they're gonna feel the same after I dye them. But certainly, Madison, I'll be sending you the one that I think is softer / better from the process. I always send my lab partners my favorite of the skeins that I've dyed. All right, now I have a zip tie that I've labeled old. I have the skein that is older, and I'm going to put the zip tie on so we will be able to tell the difference between them throughout our dyeing process. There are some bare yarns that bloom or behave a lot differently once you have dyed them, and so that could be happening here as well. I'm trying to decide, I think on camera I do notice a color difference. The old skein is a hair darker than the newer one. The newer one's a little bit brighter. And I think the texture difference, I would describe the older one as almost having a little more cottony feel, if that's something that makes sense. Again, still like a nice soft yarn, just not quite as soft and squishy as the newer one. So one reason for this video is that maybe I'll change my mind about Swish fingering as a yarn that I'm interested in dyeing. And here is something that I can say that is an interesting difference between the two skeins. The newer skein of Swish, see how it soaked up that water nearly immediately? The older skein it doesn't seem like it's soaking it up quite as fast. Like if I pick this up, I still see some like dry spots on the yarn, and even putting it in, there was a noticeable difference to me with how like it had soaked up the water. And so that actually sort of indicates to me that there could have just been some maybe residue or something from that initial mill load. But you never know. I'm gonna pre-soak the yarn for at least an hour, and I'm gonna add to the pre-soak a skein of Knit Picks Stroll fingering weight yarn. I don't know if this is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon. I don't know if I'll be using it at all today, but then I have it on hand in case I do a technique where I want a yarn mop or something like that. And I'm pre-soaking the yarn in just some plain tap water. And who knows, maybe the result of this video will mean that I'm gonna place more orders for Swish fingering and not just Swish DK. Because I love stroll, but since I'm not a sock knitter, I don't necessarily need the strength that the nylon adds to that yarn. The yardage is not the same, but it's similar, and it like has a lovely soft texture that's just super wash wool, would work for me for a lot of different projects. But anyway, we'll get on to our dyeing project now. Let's go look at the colors. For my color palette today, I turned to this cute bird picture and picked the following Dharma acid dye colors: teal green, lilac, bright aqua, and peach blush. And recently, to when I'm filming this, I had a question about where I get these labels I put on the top of the jars. This was actually a Dharma acid dye poster I bought from the company that I cut up and then used packing tape to tape them to the lids, which I love having because it makes it really easy when I'm going through one of the containers where I store dyes to find the color I want without having to tip them onto the side to read the labels. I added our new and old version of Swish fingering to a 4-inch deep full-size catering steam pan, and I'm adding on 8 cups of water. And I want to spread things out a little bit. The colorways themselves will probably not be identical. I plan on dyeing them with the same technique, but I want to use sort of a random, not repeating color application to this. The main thing I'm hoping that we'll get in the end from this is an understanding and see if the texture is different versus how they take up dye color. So that's my goal. And to our dye bath, I'm also going to add 3 tablespoons of white vinegar. And my vinegar is 5% acetic acid. Just sort of working that through. And now we're going to start heating this up. And so when I come back, things should be a little bit steamy. And I'm going to put on my deluxe rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves, because we're going to be applying the dry dye powder directly onto our yarn. And as for our skein of stroll, which is labeled egg from another project, I dunked this in some water that had some tablespoons of white vinegar, so that way we have acid in here, and this will be just off camera, and I'll use it as a yarn mop to wipe excess dye off of my gloved fingertips onto here to create just a bonus fun colorway. I want to start with the brighter colors. And I'm going to do this in some larger little sections. At the beginning, at least, I'm attempting to mirror the different skeins. Peach blush is a color that strikes pretty quickly. And I wouldn't read too much into this looking lighter because I could have added less color. Okay, let's do some bright aqua. Come in over here. Yeah, it does feel like I'm adding a little bit more in some sections versus other sections. It's okay if we end up with some speckles though. I have a feeling that these colors, the peach and the bright aqua, would blend into something really, really pretty. So moving the color will work it through some layers, but we will probably need to flip this and add color to the other side. If you're curious, this is sort of what the yarn mop is looking like now. It'll get more and more color as we proceed. The one thing I really try to do is to make sure my gloves are dry before I go into the next color. Let's go here and there. Lilac is a funny color because see how dark it looks right now when it's very pigmented, but it can also break and give us a bunch of like pinks and then like reds in it. I had considered bringing in a darker purple as well, but then decided to just stick with the lilac. And so sometimes it can feel more bluer, sometimes it feels more pink. I think it depends a little bit if things are warm or hot, because this is what came off of my gloves versus the more blue purples that we see in here. And now we've got the teal. I do have a whole video where I
looked at applying colors in a method similar to this, cold versus hot. And so you can go and check that out if you would like. And I'll try to have editing Rebecca go and pull that video so I can have it in the video description for you to find easily. But I've definitely observed that some colors behave differently if I'm using them cold versus hot, which is why I went and investigated that. Because sometimes you might think a color might behave one way on your yarn, and then you'll be surprised to see it's doing something else different entirely. So I don't mind if we end up with some whites left behind, but the color I'm finding myself wanting a little bit more of is the peach blush. So I'm sort of bringing this in. It's okay if we end up with speckles from it. I know it can strike really quickly, but just sort of breaking up some of these white areas and bringing in that color. Ooh, do I want to leave it? I'll move it. I'll move it. And by move it, I mean I'll come in with the spoon and work it through a little bit. But one of the reasons why I hesitated is because sometimes, you know, it's hard to decide. And this is a color, you can see it's striking really fast. So while we're able to get spread in some areas, we're also getting a lot of little fun speckles from this. Okay, but I'm really happy with where we are so far with this color. I'm gonna let things sit for, I think, 5 minutes. Well, let's just peek and see. We still have a fair amount of the teal, but that's mostly at this edge, so that's not necessarily bad. Yeah, let's wait 5 minutes and then we'll flip. I'm not even gonna check for coverage. Let's just flip the yarn over so we can dye the other side. And you can see that we have some coverage here. We have some whites as well. But we have some spread of these colors, and we might see more spread and more blend. It depends on how much of each of them we add. But it does look like the colors are mostly staying in place from where we placed them.
On the second side, I started adding colors in those areas where I could see the pastel from that first pass. So I added purples on top of purples, aquas on top of aquas, etc. Not being super rigid, I might add the colors in some additional areas as well, but following this general pattern, because this is something that can help you preserve some of that color without having things mix too much. Of course, I have a feeling all these colors would blend beautifully, so mixing them wouldn't really be an issue. But this is the type of thing I do, for example, if I'm doing neon colors with some black in between and I want those neons to still feel neon, I'll try to make sure that I place the colors in a similar place so that way they don't blend and become a lot more muted. But if you also want to prevent color spread more, you can start with a lower level of water in your pan. But I wanted the colors to be able to spread throughout this project. And I'm really loving the way that the colors are interacting together. Going into the second side, I had a feeling that I might not need to do third or fourth flips with this colorway, but I did go ahead and wait 5 minutes before moving the yarn again. So that way we would give the colors I added a chance to strike to the yarn a little bit before moving things and then seeing, oh, there's a spot here where I wish I had a tiny bit more color, and adding color there. I adore this color combination, and I'm gonna have to do this more often. Oh, I love that using the lilac, even though it's more of a pastel, as a straight dye powder, gives us that deeper purple, and the juxtaposition of that with the bright aqua and the peach blush is amazing. So I'm now going to heat this yarn for 30 minutes, which actually I suppose could be 25 minutes because I didn't just add dye. I'm adding a little bit more acid, and I'm also gonna add a little bit more water, because the other thing with straight powder application like we've done here is that you really want to make sure that it's all had a chance to dissolve. And so adding the more water means that we don't have any pockets of dry dye left in there. I mean, there could still be some that we need to rinse away, but you can see even just sort of like rinsing along the top of the pan, there's not very much color that has fallen over there. I try to be really careful and precise with my placement so I don't make a mess. but I'll check back in after 25-ish minutes. Okay, reduce the heat. And now that the time is up, we're gonna remove the yarn. This color combination is so pretty. I'm gonna need to play with this again. I love it. I feel like there was a color challenge I did with, maybe it was a purple and navy, and then this color. I may be misremembering with the purple, but peach blush is stunning. Okay, and I'm gonna set this yarn aside to cool completely. And in the meantime, I'm gonna bring over our yarn mop and add it to the dye bath. And so some color is coming off, but with just time, a lot of the colors are gonna stay put a little bit more. But I am gonna move this yarn in the dye bath so that way when the colors spread, we can capture it a little bit all over. But I'm now gonna heat this skein for 30 minutes and then I'll remove it and I'll wash this one off camera. But I'll come back shortly once this is cool so we can wash this one. I'm gonna wash all the yarn together, including the yarn mop, because we can. Okay, I'm not expecting to see any color bleeding. Sometimes when I start washing, I move where the zip ties are, just in case there's any dye that's trapped in one of the little crevices so I can move it out. But first look, things are looking well. Well, things are looking good. I don't know. And I have tons of other tools that I've been rinsing that are just in the sink from dyeing. And in case you're curious what's coming up, got some foam brushes out. But that's neither here nor there. I added some soap to our rinse. And we really shouldn't have any bleeding. And we don't. When I say we shouldn't have any bleeding, it's like I say that and hold my breath because I'm like, I'm hoping that there's no bleeding. But anyway, I'm now going to finish rinsing out that soap. Then I'm going to put all the yarn through my spin dryer and hang it up to dry. And I think with the yarn wet, it would be too hard for me to do any kind of field test comparison. So we'll go ahead and wait for it to be dry. It's been probably at least a week since I've dyed this yarn, and blind, I've been picking it up and feeling it, and I can still tell the difference between the old and the new. I'll feel the yarn in one hand and then I'll swap and I'll feel it in the other hand, and something about it is just different. Now, I will say that if I picked this up today and felt it, I don't think I would feel disappointed. It feels perfectly soft to me. The differences are really subtle, but I guess the best way I can describe it is it's almost like this is a tad stiffer. And I don't think it's the twist that's any different because that looks similar. I was just looking closely to see. But the truth is that we just don't know what happened that caused the differences. And one of the big conclusions from this comparison is I think I need to get more Swish fingering. How many of you would be interested in having some superwash fingering weight yarn that doesn't have nylon, or do you not care? Is it worth adding this into the mix, or should I stick with stroll? But the second point is that just like you can have dye lots from a company and they may not match if they're dyed in different dye lots, there are batch lots. And I think that there's numbers on the tags of bare yarn. There's batch lots there. And whether or not there was a change at some point between superwash wool and superwash merino, I don't know. So I don't know if they're different fiber contents or really if it was just a newer yarn and subsequent batches were softer. And so I don't have an answer for you there. I don't normally notice a difference from batch to batch, but it's worth bringing this up because it could happen that you order yarn that you order all the time, you touch it, and you're just like, wait, this doesn't feel like what's in my memory, and wonder what's going on. Speaking of stroll, here is our yarn mop in all of her glory. Madison, thank you so much for being my lab partner for today's episode of Dyepot Weekly. I'm going to be sending you the new skein because I think that it's a tad softer, and so I really hope that you're going to love it. And if you at home want to learn how you can become a lab partner like Madison, go and check out the listings in the ChemKnits Creations Etsy shop. I'll have it linked down in the video description. The yarn mop looks great with both of our other skeins. The colors are similar, but they're a little bit softer, and so it'll likely work up a little bit differently. So could you pair it together? Sure. Stroll and Swish fingering have different fiber contents, but the yardage is similar and the gauge should be similar. The asterisk that I have when you consider mixing different fiber blends is that be careful with washing because things could wash differently or bloom differently. And so if you're concerned, make a swatch with a little blend of the different fibers and wash it and see how that works up. But if you're going to be doing a project that would be hand wash only, like lace or something, then by all means mix all kinds of different fiber types. You can get some amazing and stunning results that way. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I still love this bird inspiration. I love this color combination. Oh my gosh, something about peach blush is a color that I need to come back to again and again. It is so lovely. Do you want to see me do more with this color palette? Let me know in the comments. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching.